This episode will be a little different than our usual weekly Monday fare, and it will be a little bit shorter than our usual weekly Monday fare. And we will do a regular episode of Exit Philosophy that we will drop on Tuesday, October the 24th, in place of what we usually do on Mondays. And our focus for that episode will be the coming Blue Jays offseason and ways that the front office needs to go about improving the roster. But today is a special day. And when I say today, I want to be clear that it's Monday, October the 23rd. And Griff and I were talking about it, and we said, you know what? We've got to honor October the 23rd because it's been 30 years to the date that Touch 'em All Joe happened. Joe Carter's walk-off home run to clinch the 1993 World Series for the Toronto Blue Jays, making them back-to-back champions, and of course, the most recent World Championship that Toronto celebrated in the sport of baseball. So, Griff, we are going to relive this from our own unique perspectives, and we both have them, even though I wasn't quite the grizzled vet that I am now 30 years ago.
But the amazing thing about that is that it made Joe Carter an icon. There had been big moments in Toronto Blue Jays history. They had won the World Series the year before, and Joe Carter had caught the flip from Mike Timlin at first base on the Otis Nixon bunt attempt. So there had been big moments. There had been big home runs previously, but never, in my opinion, has one swing of the bat made one player such an icon and a national treasure as that home run on October 23rd, 1993, made of Joe Carter.
So when I say this, Griff, I just want to offer this context. My first ever favorite Blue Jay, because I was 6 years old, turned 6 in June of 1985. So that's when I really started to follow the Blue Jays, and to the extent I understood things, have memories. Willie Upshaw was my first favorite Blue Jay. Fred McGriff was my favorite Blue Jay after he replaced Willie Upshaw. And my favorite Blue Jay after Fred McGriff left was a guy they acquired in that trade, Joe Carter. So I loved Joe Carter, but so I say this with due respect to Joe. He is in the level of excellence because of that home run. He was a 30 home run, 100 RBI guy back when RBIs were more celebrated than they are now. I don't deny that he was a cleanup hitter who produced, but it's that moment that put Joe Carter in the level of excellence.
Absolutely. I've thought about it many times, is that Joe Carter would have been abused by analytics people in this day and age because he had so many people. There was such a prodigious offensive machine that the Blue Jays had in those years, and the opportunities to drive in runs, the old RBI production, Mr. Clutch, those opportunities were so great. And his numbers, if you really parse and analyze and take them through the ringer of today's statistical analysis, weren't that impressive. But at the time, like you said, I mean, this guy was just an RBI, a run-producing machine, and it came to a head with this one swing of the bat against Mitch Williams, who was struggling and probably shouldn't have been out there, but they had no alternative.
So let's talk about that night, October the 23rd, 1993, and where we were. And Griff, funny enough, obviously we hadn't met, but we were in the same building. We were both at what was then the Sky Dome. And I've talked about this before. I've even had my dad on the radio back when I was a radio host to talk about some of his memories from back in the day. But as good fortune would have it, my father in 1987 was offered and accepted the job of CFO of the soon-to-be Sky Dome. So I have memories of being at the Sky Dome when it was still under construction. There were Christmas parties in December of 1987 and December of 1988. The roof hadn't been put up, and we were out there bundled up on what would eventually become the playing field and the concert stage surface. And we just hung around, had family Christmas parties. So my memories go back that far to 8 and 9 years old. And my dad continued in that role and in other roles at Skydome until 1997. So we as a family, and we were spread out all over the stadium, but both sets of my grandparents were at the game. My brother and I, my brother Drew, who was 10 and I was 14, were sitting in foul territory down the right field line. I can't remember everybody we were with, but we were most certainly with one of my aunts and uncles. And we were a few rows down from the Phillies fan section. So I was at the game, 14 years old. In my heyday, I think we all can agree that our sports fandom, really anything we're interested in life, but our fandom for whatever we care about in life is really solidified in that 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old age range. It was absolute pandemonium. And as we go back and forth here, Griff, I'll share some of my more specific memories of the home run and what happened from my vantage point. But talking about it now, I actually get goosebumps.
It was crazy because instead of being with family, I was with extended family in the press box. I was doing commissioner's office game notes for the entire series and for the 92 series. So this was another game in what turned out to be 39 consecutive World Series that I attended. And it's different being among baseball media and writers, especially of that generation, because there was a lot of cynicism going on. And the Jays had been up 5-1 and had blown the 5-1 lead in the seventh inning. Seventh inning has something special in Blue Jays postseason history.
Yeah.
And so they went down 6-5, and then the rest of it unfolded. I'll go on with my story when you continue with yours, because there were some funny moments in the press box with all those cynics having to change their game stories because it was in the bottom of the ninth when Joe did his thing.
Right. So a few things, and these are sort of splotchy memories and then some far more vivid. But, Rickey Henderson had been acquired at the end of August. So this was back when there were 2 trade deadlines. And actually, there were 2 trade deadlines up until just a handful of years ago. So it's not like we're going too far back into the past. But Rickey Henderson was acquired in a trade from the Oakland A's. I believe it was August the 31st. If I'm a day or two off on that, forgive me, but it was definitely the end of August. And he didn't come to Toronto and tear the cover off the ball. And he took over a leadoff spot that changed the configuration of Whamco, which was the nickname given to the first 5 hitters in the Blue Jays lineup, WAMCO, Whamco, because it was a terrific offensive team. It was a more offensive team than the 92 World Series team. White, Elmar, Carter, let me get this right. White, Elmar, Molitor, Carter, Olerud, Whamco, 1 through 5 in the lineup. And it became like Whamco because Henderson showed up. Rickey managed to get on base in the bottom of the 9th inning. And Devon White, I'm not going to get my details. I could go to Baseball Reference and look up the play-by-play. But Devon White recorded an out. Paul Molitor then came up, Griff, and got a base hit. So now there are 2 on. Am I right, or are you correcting me?
Yeah, no, but I would like to suggest that Devon White's out was important. It was a 9-pitch at bat. He worked Mitch Williams for 9 pitches, and then following that grinding at bat against Mitch Williams, 8 pitches later, Joe Carter hooked one into the left field,
right
over the left field fence. So that don't diminish White's contribution to that big inning, even though Rickey started it off with a base on balls.
So down the right field line, and I actually can't explain this to you. I don't know the origin of it, but my favorite number through my years on this planet has been the number 20. I don't remember why. There's nothing specific about. I just love the number 20. So in between each pitch, because everybody was up out of their seats and clapping, in between each pitch, I would clap my hands 20 times. So I'm up and, you know, whatever. I'm doing my thing, figuring that it's going to have some positive effect on the end result here. And what I remember about the Joe Carter home run, again, I'm down the right field line in foul territory. And when I say down the right field line, I mean we were sitting in the outfield. This wasn't like, you know, you're a couple of sections over from the Phillies first base dugout. We were down the right field line. The ball leaves Carter's bat. And, you know, the baseball is white. And up against the backdrop, from my perspective, are the fans along the third base line. I lost the ball immediately. I you know, because it was, how would you describe it, Griff? Was it a frozen rope, or was it like, it didn't feel like Joe got all of that?
No, it would.
Yet,
to me, it was like teeing off on the first hole and hitting a low hook. You don't know where it's going to end up, but this one stayed in the fairway long enough to create pandemonium.
And what's funny is, like, I can watch
it was more than a classic. It was different than a classic home run swing where you go, oh yeah, he got all of that one.
And what I remember, Griff, is that, like, I mean, I can watch the highlight to this day, and I still don't really see the ball, like where it clears the fence and then lands on the ground floor of the stadium. It didn't make it to the stands as far as I recall. So I lost sight of the ball. I think everybody around me did. But then when the folks, and this is all split second stuff, but when the fans on the other side of the stadium went nuts and Carter started jumping around, we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, what? And we lost our heads, absolutely lost our heads. And what a magic moment it was. But, you know, I have to say, I was in the stadium and I can't claim to have seen the home run actually happen. I saw Joe swing the bat, but I didn't see the ball leave the yard.
When I was doing the game notes for the commissioner pregame, in-game, and post-game, they had us set up in the old press box in the back where they normally would have the dining room. They set it up as a commissioner's office. And so that's where I was set up. But since there was nothing going on and the game looked like it was might be ending in the ninth, I went and I stood in a walkway, and I know all the Phillies people because the Expos had played the Phillies so many times year after year. And we spent a lot of time together pre and post game with their broadcasters and whatever. And Chris Wheeler, who's a wonderful broadcaster and started out in PR at the same time I did with the Phillies. We were standing in the walkway right behind home plate. And Mitch Williams was struggling. Mitch Williams was breathing heavily. Mitch Williams didn't look like he was going to get the job done. And Chris Wheeler turned to me as we were standing shoulder to shoulder. He said, "Rich, do you think that we could borrow John Wetland for an inning?" John Wetland was establishing himself in Montreal as a great closer. And just as he said that, the next pitch, Joe swung, hooked, the place went wild. I had to go run and start doing my post-game notes, and Wheels went back to the broadcast booth to wrap up. So it was pandemonium in the press box and with me in particular. But that moment, for the next probably 20 years, every time I would see Chris Wheeler, I would go, "No, Chris, you cannot borrow John Wetland." And it became a running gag, and Wheels would tell everybody every time we were together, he'd tell that story. And that's my lasting memory of that moment. It was stunning. It was funny to see the reaction of the writers, even if they were Blue Jays fans. They're going, "Oh shit! Now we got to rewrite," which
You're right. Yes.
which is
Yeah.
always a wonderful thing. But yeah, it was an incredible moment, and it's hard to believe it was that long ago. And it's good to celebrate that anniversary because it changed a lot of things in Toronto, and it gives something for this current group of Blue Jays to aim at and to look at and say, hey, it can be done.
Last thought on the home run and the moments after. So this is one of the early high IQ moments I've had in my life, Griff, amongst what has now become a long list of high IQ moments. But the red, white, and blue bunting that was along the facade in between each level of Skydome, people, some fans, pulled it down. So this was along the 100 to 200 level in between. Pulled it down and started. Now, here's another thing. Like I don't know what the rules are today, because you've got to essentially go through customs to get into a stadium to watch a baseball game. I don't know if Swiss Army knives would be allowed in stadiums today, but everybody and their dog who was an adult seemed to have one back then. So there were guys around me, young adults, who had pulled out their Swiss Army knives, and the little scissors on the Swiss Army knives, they were cutting part of the bunting so that they could have a little scrap of it as a souvenir. 14-year-old me didn't have a Swiss Army knife with me at the stadium and decided that the braces on my lower teeth might double as maybe not scissors, but at least something that would rip the bunting so I could have a little bit of it myself. So, high IQ moment. I put the bunting up to my mouth and I tried to pull some of it or rip some of it off, and managed to take probably 4 or 5 of the braces on the front lower level teeth and loosen them right off, pulled them right off of the glue. So that required a trip to the orthodontist a day or two later. And one of the young guys was kind enough to cut a little bit of the bunting off for me, and I still have that to this day. But I was at the orthodontist a day or two later to correct the problem I had caused by trying to get a souvenir after the game.
Have you ever talked to Joe Carter and told him that it's his fault that
my parents had an extra orthodontist bill that month?
But the thing about the Swiss Army knife, I think that evolved from, remember the Chris Chambliss home run for the Yankees, and all of a sudden the fans are pouring over the rail and there's no security, no police. And that's the way it was up until the Chris Chambliss home run. And then they started having the police, the mounted police with the horses, and anybody who went on the field was bludgeoned by billy clubs. And John Gibbons has that great story about warming up Dwight Gooden in the '86 World Series in the bullpen. And every time you ask him how Gooden's fastball looked, was he ready to go? Because he had just pitched a couple of days before. And Gibby, you know how Gibby is, he goes, yeah, every time I caught a fastball, the horses leaped in the air and like they were scared. So that's a perfect description of Dwight Gooden's fastball. But that's the evolution of the Swiss Army knife, and I'm sure that fan bases were going, hey, what do we take as a souvenir? We can't go down and get turf anymore. We can't get sod. So that was the replacement for that. I did a little research knowing we were going to be talking about this, but I'd like to go down with you a list of maybe 5, 6 all-time important home runs in Blue Jays history. And we'll start with the Joe Carter one in 93, obviously. Then 92, I go back and Ed Sprague's home run against Jeff Reardon changed the course of the game.
Are you ranking them right now, Griff, or are
Oh
you
no,
just going?
I'm just
Okay.
reeling them off. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then we got the 2015 over my shoulder, the bat flip for those watching. The bat flip home run, that's 3. Then Edwin in the following year in the wild card game against Baltimore when Zach Britton was nowhere to be found. And then there's one more that I got, and it's Robbie's in Game 4 of the '92 League Championship Series in Oakland.
Yeah.
That's about my list. What do you
Yeah.
got? Anyone to add that is important in your mind?
Yeah. So I'll rank mine, and then I have a not one to add, but I think a day that deserves special mention, even though that day was not as consequential in the standings or what have you. But Carter for me is first. And I know that people say, well, what about Roberto Alomar off of Eckersley? I just think if you hit a World Series clinching home run, and I know it was the second World Series for the Blue Jays, but I just think if you.
And it wasn't a win or go home game either.
I know, but still, it's just, how do you top that?
Paul Beeston,
right?
Paul Beeston swears it's the Robbie Alomar home run that was the big.
And he's second on my list. And the context for that, if you're a younger listener who doesn't remember that time or wasn't alive at that time, is that the Oakland A's had taken over the AL West after the Twins won the '87 World Series. And Oakland cleared through the Red Sox in the '88 ALCS on the way to losing to the Dodgers, but in the World Series, but they wiped out the Red Sox. The '89 Blue Jays had lost 24 of their first 36 games under Jimmy Williams. Williams was fired. Cito Gaston was promoted from hitting coach to manager. And the Jays went 89-73 by season's end. So that's like 77-49 to win the AL East. But they were far inferior in all ways, talent, etc., to Oakland, and the A's cleared the Jays out in 5 games in the '89 ALCS on the way to winning an interrupted World Series over the Bay Area rival San Francisco Giants. The famous '89 earthquake interrupted that World Series. And then Oakland cleared through Boston again in the '90 ALCS on the way to losing to the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. So Oakland had been a dominant team. And the Jays had developed quite a rivalry, and '89 was lopsided in the playoffs. So to beat Oakland, to have had a 2-1 series lead as they did, and they coughed up a home game. I think it was it game 1 or game 2, Griff, in the '92 ALCS? It might have been game 1.
Yeah.
And, because then now everybody's like, oh my God, or is it going to happen again? We're better than Oakland this year, but now we're down a game. We've given up home field already. For Robbie Alomar to hit that home run to put what resulted in the Blue Jays being up 3-1 at the dreaded Oakland Coliseum, that was a huge, huge moment. And it marked the moment where playoff success was going to be different this time, or the playoff result was going to be different this time around.
Yeah, Beeston says that home run, to your point, changed the attitude towards the Oakland A's. And he said that everyone in the Blue Jays group knew after Robbie's home run that they were going to win that series. And they did.
And Eckersley had stared down, gotten a big strikeout the previous inning. Dan, the previous inning, I should know who it was.
Back then that was a big deal, but now you see from everybody. So,
but it was, but Eckersley, and again, context for younger listeners, Eckersley was, I know Kirk Gibson will argue with me on this one based on his massive home run in game 1 of the '88 World Series, but Eckersley generally was untouchable. He was the best closer in the game at that point.
And I point out to young players when I've given seminars to rookie seminars for MLB and for the Blue Jays, that after Kirk Gibson's home run, Dennis Eckersley went and stood in front of his locker and handled wave after wave after wave of media asking how he screwed up and what happened and what it means. And he didn't back down once. And I point that out because I was never a big Dennis Eckersley fan until the Kirk Gibson, because I was there for that one and had to go into the what was supposed to be the losing clubhouse turned into the winning clubhouse. But in the aftermath, saw what Eckersley had done, and I've used that in lecturing young players about how to handle situations.
Yeah, just wear it, man. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. It happens. It's, you know, I wouldn't call it an Eckersley failure. It was just a massive moment for Kirk Gibson and the Dodgers, and it paced them to the World Series. So the context for that, Ed Sprague would be my third. And the reason I put Sprague that high is because the Jays had lost game one of the 1992 World Series. So they'd beaten Oakland. They lose game one because Damon friggin' Berryhill hit a 3-run home run off of Jack Morris to turn a 1-0 Blue Jays lead into a 3-1 deficit. And the Jays lost game one 3-1. They're now losing by a run in the top of the 9th inning of game two. Like, we're that close to bringing this series back to Toronto for the debut of the World Series in Canada, down 2-0, which, aside from not being ideal, also means you don't have a chance to clinch in a 2-3-2 series on home turf. You're now playing survival to get the series back to Atlanta if you come home down 2-0. So Ed Sprague hitting that home run, a bench player at the time because Kelly Gruber was still on the team, so he was the backup third baseman. He had been a catcher in the minor leagues. With Pat Tabler and Derek Bell, they called themselves Turner Ward. They called themselves the trenches, right? The bench players. Ed Sprague, a huge, huge moment in Blue Jays history to turn that series around and change the momentum.
And imagine, Scott, if they had come back losing that game, if Sprague hadn't hit the home run against Jeff Reardon, who's a good friend of mine, but they would have had the fan base pissed off about the upside down flag before game one,
right?
And come back down 0-2. And I've told a story where I blame myself for that upside down flag because I'd been down watching the Marine, the color guard, do their rehearsal, and Mike Swanson, who was with me, he's a longtime PR guy, a good friend. He said, "Hey, did you notice the flag was upside down?" And I said, "Oh, they'll figure it out. They will. Let's go back upstairs and do some more work, do some notes, game notes." And he said, "Are you sure about that?" So I went and stood next to Howie Starkman for the national anthem when the color guard came up. They had it wrapped around the pole, so you never knew. And when they unfurled it, I gave Howie an elbow in the ribs. I said, "Howie, trouble." And definitely. But the Ed Sprague probably saved me a little bit of grief too.
There you go.
So he'd be high on my list.
Oops. Bautista and Edwin are 4 and 5 for me. And I would think for younger fans, Griff, like the rankings can be debated, but for younger fans who experienced playoff baseball in Toronto for the first time in the Bautista Edwin era, those may rank higher because it's what people remember, but very special and important home runs in their own rights. You and I mean, you've been in the game for a half century. I have loved the game for longer than I would like to admit now, given my age. I've followed the game closely for the better part of 40 years now. I can't think of a more crazy inning than the 7th inning of Game 5 of the 2015 Division Series, Blue Jays, Texas. Just everything that happened the top half, and then the Bautista bat flip, and Edwin walking off Baltimore to get the Jays into the playoffs, if you will, in 2016 was special. The honorable mention before you jump in and fill in any of the spaces you want to comment on those home runs. I do think, even though it was inconsequential in the standings and the era was different and it was a Yankees-Red Sox division, I do think Carlos Delgado's 4 home run game in September of 2003 against the then Tampa Bay Devil Rays needs to be mentioned because I view Carlos Delgado as a guy who, had he played for the Blue Jays at a different time, either before he became a star or years later in the mid 2010s, he'd be viewed differently, and his production would be viewed differently than it is, because it happened at a time when the Jays weren't contenders for playoff spots.
Yeah, I'm glad you added the Delgado feat, because you talk about your favorite Blue Jays. Carlos Delgado is my favorite Blue Jay of all time. And that's covering from 95 on and observing, obviously, through the playoffs and World Series as someone working for the commissioner's office. He's all class. I told him he should run for governor of Puerto Rico at some point, and he laughed. He said he's doing better without that.
Yeah, doesn't need the headache.
The other thing about the Bautista home run is that if it's possible without using words, that's a home run that was taken out of context. You say words are taken out of context. Well, that home run was taken out of context because, as you point out, it was the entire seventh inning. It was the top of the seventh inning with a throwback to the mound, hitting the bat, and the run scoring, and the umpires not being certain of the call, and John Gibbons saying, "Well, I don't like that rule," whatever it was.
And I like it. It shouldn't be like that.
So the emotion of that top of the seventh, followed by the emotion of that one swing of the bat that turned it around, and just the stadium exploded in noise and action, that created the bat flip, the huge bat flip, and the controversial bat flip that these days you watch in playoffs on TV, and somebody hits a home run in the second inning and they do a bigger bat flip than Jose did. But at the time it was special.
Griff, people bat flip walks now.
That's exactly right. They do.
Not even walk-off walks. Just like maybe an important eighth inning walk, you're down a run, you're the leadoff hitter, you take a close full count pitch, ball 4, boom, you're going to first, and it's like, I'm going to chuck this thing as high as I possibly can.
You're exactly right. And in the words of Ron Piche, who used to be run the Jerry Park when I started, and had pitched for the Milwaukee Braves and pitched for a couple of other teams, and was good friends with Claude Raymond. Ron Piche would turn to me when something like that happened, and he'd go, "Richard, this game has really changed." And he was exactly right. And that was his go-to line about everything that he didn't like. And his generation was 50s and 60s. And so our generation is as curmudgeonly as that, but in a different context.
I'll just add, going back to the walk-off home run game, Joe Carter, Touch 'em all Joe, and everything. And I've talked about this often enough, Griff, that I think I'll be able to contain my emotions. But a lot of people, and I don't dispute it because I understand where they're coming from, don't like Skydome or don't like Rogers Center. Maybe people like it a little bit more now after the renovations and the wall isn't uniform left field corner to right field corner, and the amenities have changed and all of that. I always saw Skydome as different for a couple of reasons. The second reason being more important than the first. But the first reason was that it was a marvel at the time. And it preceded by only a couple of years Camden Yards. I don't count Comiskey 2, or what is now Guaranteed Rate Field, although they've done a really nice job refurbing that. Comiskey 2, as it was known, Comiskey Park 2 on the south side of Chicago, as it was known when it opened in 1991, was very bland, very sort of metallic looking, and there was no warmth to it. They've done a very nice job refurbing it over the last 3 decades. Still not one of the greater stadiums in the sport, but better than it was. But when Camden Yards came in 1992, and what was then Jacobs Field, now Progressive Field in Cleveland, came in I think 94, that really started the retro ballpark run through the 90s and early 2000s, and suddenly Skydome was an old, cavernous, multi-purpose clunker. But the second reason that, so I just want to remind people that it was a technological marvel of its time. So there was that. The second one is more personal for me, which is, because of my dad's role at the stadium from 1987 to 1997, from before it opened until my dad left the stadium in 1997, when I walk in to what is now Rogers Center, or what was then Skydome, I see the ghosts of my now deceased grandparents. My dad's dad passed away in 2001, loved baseball. Walter Johnson was his favorite player as a little boy. My grandmother, my dad's mom, passed away in 2008. My mom's mom passed away in 2011. My mom's dad passed away in 2016. They were all there that night in 93. My aunts and uncles, were in their 40s. They're now in their 70s or 80s, and are all still with us, thankfully. But everybody was there that night. We weren't all sitting together because we were all in different parts of the stadium. But so when I would walk in, I feel the presence of people I love who are no longer with us. And I remember those days as a boy or as a teenager. And so that is what Skydome, Rogers Center, and I hate calling it the latter for a variety of reasons, so let's call it Skydome. That's what Skydome means to me. And I'll always be grateful that I was at that game that night, and that I got to see a lot of really important Blue Jays games, either because I was a kid growing up who got to go to the games, or because I worked them. The bat flip game and the Edwin walk-off game in 15 and 16. So it's a cool history for me that way.
Well, they always say that baseball, among all the major sports, is the most family oriented, and you've just proven that with those stories. But I have a couple of observations. I think one of them is that the Rogers Center Skydome changed, the perception in my eyes changed when they went from the cutout at the bases to the full dirt infield. Because to me, that made it look like, even though you could tell that it was artificial turf, the full dirt infield was baseball to me. And I never enjoyed and I never tolerated the cutouts because it looked stupid, and it wasn't baseball. It showed the multi-purpose facility that it was. The other thing, I have memories about Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, because I had never been there until I went to my first World Series working in baseball in 1978, and they were playing the Dodgers. And then went there all through the 90s, the mid-90s on, covering World Series. And to me, the ghosts of those Yankees were always present. And the one moment that sort of made me think, what am I doing, was when I took a train up from Baltimore to see David Cohn's first return after he had an injury. It wasn't surgery, but he was coming back from injury and he was pitching at home. And they had just come back. The Yankees had just come back from a West Coast trip. And I took the train up from Baltimore. And apparently I had been poisoned by bad crab cakes in Baltimore. Had crab cakes every day, every time that we go to Baltimore. But
there were a few derailments on your Amtrak.
These ones were poison. I don't remember the Philadelphia train station because I was in the bathroom the entire time. But here's the story about Yankee Stadium. We got there, and their press room used to be downstairs between the clubhouses, and there was a bathroom down there, the toilet just there in the hallway. And I went in there, and I wasn't feeling good, and I threw up more crab cake. And as I righted myself and walked out in the hall, my first thought was, I bet Babe Ruth did the same thing in that same spot. And so that brought it home that I was a part of history. And so that's my memory. My lasting.
And now etched on the bathroom walls of the Amtrak station in Philadelphia, Babe Ruth puked here. Rich Griffin puked here.
No, this was in the basement of Yankee Stadium.
The basement of Yankee Stadium.
Between the clubhouses. Yeah, no, I don't think I would have ever thought that Babe did it in the train station in Philadelphia.
Well, that's how they
I
travel.
do know that on some mornings on the day game, he might have done it in that same toilet area in the tunnel outside the clubhouse.
Although they did travel by train back in the day, and there was an American League Philadelphia team, the A's, and it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. Griff and Babe Ruth, I mean, it comes full circle for you. You were heading up from Baltimore. That's where Babe Ruth's from. You and the Babe.
Baseball is such a close circle.
Vomit and poetry all in one.
The memories.
all the memories. And some of the ones we'd like to forget. But remembering 30 years ago, and Griff, you said it. I don't know if you've said it on the air, but we were certainly talking about it before we hit record here. It's amazing that it's been that long. And I'm 44 years old now. I was 14 at the time. And when you're 14, you really don't have life experience and context for time and how quickly it passes. And then once you get into middle-aged adulthood, you certainly feel time picking up. And so the fact that it's been 30 years, there are memories from that day and that night that I remember like they were yesterday, which means it's a moment for me personally and many Blue Jays fans etched in time.
It's that's why I feel I need to write a book, because it's like opening the dryer and pulling out all the laundry. It's all like scrambled together until you fold it and put it and store it. And this is what I'm going to do with the book. I'm going to sort my laundry.
I like that. That's the title.
Sorting my laundry.
The Rich Griffin autobiography, Sorting My Laundry. There you go. I mean, why not?
Me and the Babe.
There's no real context for it. It doesn't make sense, but it's probably an attention getter. Who the hell would name their autobiography Sorting My Laundry?
I don't know.
Donald.
I don't even want to say, but
no. Donald Sutherland is getting a stamp, which is an awesome honor for him. And you've got something you want to say about that, Griff?
Yeah, Donald Sutherland, there's a lot of fun made of celebrity fans. And to me, he was the ultimate celebrity fan for the Montreal Expos. He didn't ask for attention. He wasn't Drake-like in that regard. He went to games. He enjoyed the games. He scored the games. He went back to his summer home in Lake Memphremagog. And he was always around, and he was always supportive. And I remember when I asked him to do the voiceover for the 20th anniversary highlight film, which if you go on YouTube, you can find Expo's 20th anniversary highlight film, written by me, directed by Brian Schechter, who was the producer of TSN TV games at the time, and voiced over by Donald Sutherland. And all he wanted was season tickets. Like, imagine Donald Sutherland, and it was a 3-hour voiceover. He thought it was going to be 45 minutes, and we went to Miami Sound Studio. It's a famous sound studio where a lot of albums have been put together. And Donald showed up in a full-length camel hair coat because he knew it was going to be air conditioned in there. And he stood in front of this standing mic, and we played the video. And for the first 2 hours, he would go, "Hey, that was great, Donald," when he'd read a section, and he'd go, "No, I can do it better. I can be better. I can do it better. I can," and he would do it again. And then, no, still not. After about 3 hours, he just said, "Screw it. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Give me my tickets."
But no, it wasn't even like that. I think he
No, I know.
nothing.
Yeah.
But then we were going to lunch because it was a full day's effort. We were going to lunch, and he said, "Okay, I don't want to draw attention to myself. I don't want to meet fans." And he wore, in 93-degree heat in Miami to lunch, he wore his full-length camel hair coat. Now, if you're not looking for attention, I think you would leave that in the studio, you know? But we were at lunch and he was on his way home. He had just worked on the film Lockup. I'm sure not a lot of people have seen that. He was a prison warden, and Sly Stallone was the hero, the prisoner. And so Brian Schechter, we were at lunch trying to make small talk, and Schechter asked Donald Sutherland, "So working with Sly, that must have been interesting. Is he a better actor or a better director?" Because he did both. Was he a better actor or a better director? And Sutherland looked up from his soup and went, "Neither." And that was the end of the conversation. So, and that movie, I think whatever the Rotten Tomatoes, it got them all. So, but it's great to see Donald Sutherland being honored by a stamp. If you go and look his filmography up, it's incredible how many films he's been in. He's a great actor and a good friend, and I'm glad to see that. He deserves it.
You know, there aren't many, because you know how you've seen a movie, you know how it ends. And Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Griff, is one of those films that I watch, and I know it's not going to happen, but anytime I've watched it and it gets closer to the end, I'm always hoping that the result with Donald Sutherland's character is different than how the film ends. I didn't want that to happen, and I'm kind of being vague just in case you haven't watched the Sutherland late 70s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But yeah, that one broke my heart. But a wonderful acting job, great film.
Yeah, no,
you haven't seen it, do it.
And a proud Canadian. But just to wrap up, in terms of how things end, I was so happy to see a couple of days ago that Cito Gaston is on the ballot with the possibility of going to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and that announcement, it's one of those veteran committees, and that announcement will be December 3rd, and all best wishes to Cito, because for what he did as the first African-American manager to go to the World Series, to win the World Series, he deserves to be there, and it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, and he deserves credit for the role he played on those teams. And not just the 92 and 93 teams that he managed to the World Series championships, but like Cito was a fixture in advance of that as the hitting coach. I mean, he worked with a lot of the great players that we remember from those early days of the Blue Jays through the late 80s. And his contributions to the franchise beyond simply, and I say it simply as if it was simple, but beyond managing the two World Series championship teams, just all that he has meant to the Toronto Blue Jays, and certainly a trailblazer in his own right. So we're rooting for Cito. We're rooting for Cito.
And he's got the best campaign manager for the Hall of Fame. I think Paul Beeston is on a lot of committees in Cooperstown. And so I'm thinking that there might be a good chance that he makes it this time.
Be awesome. It would be awesome. So it's Monday, October the 23rd. October the 23rd marks the 30th anniversary of Touch 'Em All Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life. The great Tom Cheeks radio call. And it's been 30 years since the Toronto Blue Jays last hoisted a World Series trophy. Let's hope it's not another 30 years before it happens again. But Griff and I thought this would be a fun way to do our weekly Monday podcast, but there obviously is a lot of stuff to talk about in Blue Jays land, and so we're not going to skip a week. We are going to record and drop this week's regular Exit Philosophy episode tomorrow as we sit here right now, Tuesday, October the 24th. So look forward to that.
We can preview the World Series at the same time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening and for hopefully enjoying our retrospective of Touch 'Em All Joe and the 1993 World Series.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, everyone.